Hi, everyone. We're ready to get started on the final afternoon session for today. Thank you so much for joining us again this afternoon. This afternoon session, we have a series of talks around materials and making. So I'm very excited about that. First up, we have Cynthia Moyer, well known to many in the conservation community as the conservator of frames at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And Cynthia, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon from New York City, everyone, and thank you to everyone at the Art Gallery of Ontario for persisting and organizing this conference. In 2015 and 2016, the Metropolitan Museum of Art undertook a survey of frames on paintings on view in the European paintings galleries. This project was carried out with the support of funding from the Samuel H. Crests Foundation in New York City. Original frames are very rare on European paintings in a collection such as this, because the paintings have changed ownership and are no longer within their original setting. When a frame is believed to be original, often the painting has descended in a family and/or remained in a collection. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was founded in 1870. Its collection is the product of the early vision of its founders to bring fine art to the American public. It's a result of the generosity of artists and donors and of savvy acquisitions by curators. When a frame is changed, it's subject to the historical knowledge and experience of artist, collector, dealer, and curator, and equally to personal taste and fashion. A frame may be historically accurate and coincide with the date and origin of a painting, though it may have been altered to fit the painting. It may also be a convincing replica of a period frame. We can confidently determine what a frame is, but to determine when a frame might have been paired with a painting in the collection, we refer to the painting's historical information. With thanks to the curatorial and conservation departments, much of it can be found on its webpage using the Met's website, metmuseum.org, to unpack the story. The label text and catalog entry shed light on the artist's place of birth, their training, where they worked, and their circle of influence. It may describe their commissions and patronage. The website page lists the painting's provenance to the degree that it's known. We may be informed whether the painting passed through multiple ownership or even through the commercial market. We are now making note of whether it was reframed after arrival at the Met. At the initiatives of Keith Christensen, former chair of European paintings, and panel paintings and frame expert George Bazaka, we worked with the renowned frame scholar, author, and craftsman Timothy Newberry. His experience and expertise is a tremendous resource, as is his breadth of knowledge. The last time the Met focused on European frames was in 1990, when Tim, George, and Larry Cantor, now at Yale University Art Gallery, co-curated and installed the groundbreaking exhibition entitled Italian Renaissance Frames. It took place in the Lehman Wing at the Met and produced a catalog. At the same time, an exhibition on American frames, curated by Carrie Barrett, was being shown in the American Wing. The Department of European Paintings has approximately 2,500 framed paintings in their collection. It has another 800 empty frames. Many of them are important and worthy of study. 150 of those are from a Samuel H. Crests gift to the museum in the 1960s. Only 5 of the Crests frames are currently used on paintings. All frames are entered on our internal data management system, Gallery Systems, the museum system, also known as TMS, which is also used by many other American museums. The painting's website page includes an unframed image of the painting, along with tombstone information as well as label text, catalog information, provenance, exhibition history, and published references. Rather than publish another frame catalog, we felt digital information about the frames on paintings would be more accessible. We added a frame category. This method is also more malleable if changes needed to be made as a result of further examination and research. The survey incorporates two perspectives. It is a study of the frame as a standalone object, and it addresses the frame's relationship with the painting, with the artist, and the succession of ownership. A selection of 242 exceptional antique frames on paintings, which were installed in the European paintings galleries, were chosen by Tim for the survey in 2015. The frames and paintings were photographed in situ in gallery light at the time by Tess Grofland, now frame conservator at the Rijksmuseum. She completed a fellowship in the frame studio in the Paintings Conservation Department from 2015 to 2016. We spent 4 weeks examining and photographing the frames and countless notes. This included discussions to interpret what we saw physically, front and back, whether it be original, period material, or a modification such as restorations or resizing. I wrote descriptive narratives based on Tim's notes and edits. Tess spent 4 weeks editing and color correcting the images. 4 additional images are added to the website page for the painting and frame included in the survey. An overall of the framed painting, excuse me, a lower left corner detail, and a lower left corner angle detail. There is also a profile image hand-drawn by Tim. The subcategories on the web page now include a frame category, which, when highlighted, provides a narrative description. This starts with the place of origin and a date. It characterizes style and type and identifies corner joinery construction and wood species. Ornament and profile are described in sequence from the side edge adjacent to the painting outward to the back edge against the wall, which Hubert Baya might have a little bit of trouble with, but that's how we've done it. Finished materials are described and alterations are pointed out. And finally, drawing from his own extensive archive, comparable examples from the Met and other collections that Tim has surveyed are included in the description to support the identification of the frame. Tim's revised and edited notations are filed in hard copy in the Department of European Paintings Library and will remain accessible for revisions and additions and will be available to scholars. Included in Tim's notes in the curatorial files are the frame's proportion and suitability to the painting's composition and subject matter. Since then, the European paintings galleries have undergone a transformative rehang with the replacement of the skylights above 45 pre-1800 paintings galleries. They reopened last year in the fall of 2023. The project was initiated by Keith Christensen, and since his retirement, the collection has been reinstalled by a team of curators under Stefan Wolohogian, Keith's successor, in renovated galleries with revised theme-based relationships. One of the extraordinary frames that was included in our survey was off-view and could be treated during the skylight renovation project. It is a frame made in Paris between 1795 and 1800 for a portrait by the female artist Marie-Guillemine Benoit, a student of Jacques-Louis David. The aristocratic woman Jean Aigle-Mourgue lived from 1778 to 1885 and is portrayed with her eldest son, Eugène. Known as Madame Philippe Panon des Bassins de Richemont, her husband lived from 1774 to 1840. He was a successful administrator and diplomat after the French Revolution under the Consulat, Empire, and Bourbon Restauration governments. His family was from the island of Réunion in the East Indian Ocean. They built sugar and coffee plantations, and as a result, were involved in the slave trade and its difficult history. The Desbassins de Richemont family also owned a Parisian Hôtel Particulier, which is no longer standing. Building on the insights of Met curator David Pullens and of Ulrich Leben, curator at the Hôtel Beauharnais in Paris, we hope that continuing research may shed light on context and comparable examples of this exceptional frame. The framed paintings remained in the family, frame painting remained in the family until passing through a series of dealers and a private American collection before being acquired by the Met in 1953. The frame has a two-part oak back frame with a seam running at midpoint between the two timbers. Tim recognized that this construction relates to furniture joinery and cites examples with similar ornament from the Louvre. All the ornament is carved using either walnut or lime wood. The mitered corners are secured with tapered keys or splines. It has never been resized, though it has been modified in two ways. A wedge-shaped wood fill was inserted at the four miters after shrinkage. Also, the rabbit was cut out and enlarged across the top and along the proper right side, a result of the painting being wax-lined and restretched and keyed out on a new stretcher. The surface has not been regilded and retains its original oil and water gilding with a dark red bowl highlight on the burnished areas and an ochre wash beneath the matte areas. The carved lotus leaf or lamb's tongue or reticle side edge is matte water gilded and lies within a narrow burnished fillet. A burnished water gilded frieze forms the field for crisp matte water gilded volutes, which undulate between oil gilded anthemion, alternating with palmette lily form acanthus leaves. All are glued and secured with small nails. Running oil gilded bead and twisted leaf cap reel ornament lies on a burnished step. Foremost, a bold egg and dart pattern quarter round is formed by elaborately carved pine cone wrapped acanthus leaves, both oil and water gilded. The top edge is a burnished double fillet, flanking a burnished hollow, encasing alternating water gilded acanthus and laurel leaf and berry on a delicate rod. A palmette acanthus leaf overlays the frieze corner, while acanthus leaves span the lotus leaf side edge, the bead and reel, the egg and dart, and the top edge carving. The fact that these corner leaves are all intact and original further strengthens the conclusion that the frame has not been resized. The back edge hollow is amazingly further carved in stop fluting with cables and husks in burnished and matte water gilding, with a row of delicate oil gilded reticle beneath the burnished top edge fillet. The frame's dark appearance did not improve with dusting alone. It became clear that at some point in the frame's history, in order to moderate the condition of losses to the carvings and grime, the surface was coated overall with a matte sienna-colored wash, visible in the recesses of the carving. Water-soluble, it could be removed from water-gilded passages with a dampened, soft synthetic brush and transferred to paper toweling. A microemulsion further cleaned the surface dirt embedded in the coating of the oil-gilded areas. A resin coating was left in place on burnished passages. The sienna wash was left in place on the frieze, on the flat part of the frieze. After cleaning, it became clear that there were approximately 92 carving losses, including poor repairs executed with gesso putty or plaster, modeled by hand, and overpainted with bronze paint or overgilded on red bowl. On the top edge, within the burnished hollow, there are 15 losses to the full leaf elements and 18 losses to portions of the leaves. Most of the losses found on the frieze could be molded because they are almost flat. However, the top edge leaves, carved in the round with deep undercuts and supported on a delicate rod, are far more complex. Replacement or repair of carving losses was carried out with 3 methods. In the case of the 4 miter areas, previous wood repairs that were able to be reworked were further carved, gessoed with 6% PVOH gesso, and mordant gilded. Leaf losses on the frieze were molded with a 2-part silicone rubber material. Replacements were pressed from the molds, initially using Araldite 1253 and a product called Quickwood. Finally, System 3 2-part epoxy putty was used. These repairs were fitted and pre-gilded and toned before gluing in place with dots of PVA emulsion. In the case of the very complex top edge leaf carvings, molding and carving would have been very challenging. We decided to explore 3D printing. After discussion, the leaf examples you just saw from the top edge hollow were brought to the imaging department studio at the Met for laser scanning by our colleagues Chris Hines and Deepa Paulus. The laser scanner equipment was brought to the frame studio to scan the frieze leaf elements because it was too difficult to move the frame. Prior to scanning, all elements were coated with gray dry pigment in Regal Res, easily reversible, to reduce reflectivity. Scans were edited by our imaging colleagues and digitally repaired. We determined which elements we needed to reproduce, and digital files were extracted and then sent to the LaGuardia 3D printing lab at New York University. After a succession of attempts with different materials and printers, including nylon acrylic nitrate and acrylic resin, we weren't satisfied with the surface texture and color. Finally, after discussion with a colleague at the Guggenheim, Peter Mallow, a method was chosen which involved increasing the printing resolution while rotating the leaf 90 degrees on its axis. That finally met our requirements of surface texture and color. We placed our order. This is an image from the YouTube video Deepa and Chris presented at an archive conference last spring. They go into specifics regarding scanning and printing equipment, editing programs and materials explored during the 3D phase of this treatment. The link is at the end of this presentation. The prints were fitted into the channel. The 3D prints have a rough surface texture. Those that were originally oil gilded are mordant gilded. The 3D print repairs that were originally water gilded are water gilded. Here's some details. I applied a coating of traditional ochre-colored bole with highlights of deep red bole directly to the resin. 22-karat gold leaf was used to match the original pale gold color. The surface was distressed to simulate aging and wear and toned with gambling colors to match the darkened coating. This is an after-treatment overall and detail of the Benoit portrait and frame in the gorgeous daylight of the European Paintings Galleries after completion of the Skylight project. Coinciding with the establishment of my conservation position in 2008, the Met has committed to addressing the frames in the collection both as complements to the paintings and as art objects themselves. The ongoing research we can generate in digital format and present on the website allows us to refine, augment, and sometimes rethink the information we are building about the study of frames and share it with the public. It is a work in progress. In his retirement, Keith has written a 3-part article about Met frames over his long tenure, which has been published on the Frame blog. Internally, most recently, we are initiating the use of a TMS-formatted searchable platform, Conservation Studio, to organize our conservation records. As you know, the study of frames is a complex field. The flexibility of the digital platform is not unlike so many of the frames themselves, being changed and adapted or reproduced by gifted and skilled craftspersons. They have remained a dynamic and integral part and a component of the important works of art that form the paintings collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Welcome.
That was an incredible, innovative treatment. And thank you also for discussing your some of the cataloging of the collection. I saw Adam taking a picture of the screen here in the control room. So that's going to be super helpful for us at AGO as well.
Excellent.
Thanks. So next up we have Genevieve Tobin from the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. She's going to be talking about cleaning gels for gilding.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. I'm just so excited that we have a symposium on frames specifically. And yeah, without further ado, I'll get into my presentation. So my presentation is on exploring gel-like materials for cleaning gilded picture frames. And it's going to focus on current research with a case study and then prospective research from that. And then the current research is also being informed by previous research into this topic as well. So there is a recognised need for the research into improving materials and practices for cleaning gilded wooden surfaces. In 2018, the Getty Institute in Los Angeles had an expert meeting on this exact topic. And there's a project currently underway at the moment trying to delve into problem-solving issues around cleaning gilding. Historic picture frames constitute a significant proportion of the gilded objects found in art galleries and private collections worldwide. But despite this, the number of publications that privilege the conservation research devoted to the study of picture frames is relatively modest. And then the research into contemporary cleaning systems for cleaning gilding specifically is emerging. Today's presentation will focus on introducing some of the challenges encountered when cleaning gilded picture frames, which those of you out there that do this, frame conservators or gilded object specialists, will understand. Introduce some of the gel materials that are available to conservators and then contextualize the types of gels that are useful for cleaning gilding specifically, and look at presenting ongoing development through a case study and present prospective work. So since the late 19th century, gilded picture frames in poor condition are often brass-based overpainted, and we see this systemically around the globe. Many picture frames are affected in this manner, and then they often have overgilding schemes as well, and a number of other non-original materials. Brass-based overpainting was done in an attempt to mask losses without replacing losses, and oftentimes became fashionable as well, without maybe realizing that over time this paint oxidizes, turns very dark and black, and you get this very, very disfiguring appearance here. And there's just a lovely 17th century Tondo original water gilded carved frame on the screen here that I'm presenting to you as a great case study for an extreme example of an extensive brass-based overpaint previous treatment, and then the reversal of that was quite time-consuming and ends up being a process of archaeology to identify original structures and materials. In addition to brass-based overpainting, discoloring over time, it can also react with oil and synthetic binders, and these form metallic salts, which express themselves as green corrosion products. And you can see that up here on the slide as well, a very extreme example of that. And these are commonly called copper soaps or carboxylates. With the challenges with cleaning gilding, oil gilding have similar solubility parameters to a lot of the overpaint that's actually on top of these frames. And so that becomes very difficult to not undercut original gilding or even over gilding that you're trying to preserve. Oftentimes you need to resort to mechanical methods, and you can see that here with a scalpel. This can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending. Cleaning hydrophilic soiling, so soiling that is really easily removed with water, is really problematic for cleaning water gilded surfaces. And this is difficult because a lot of cleaning solutions and gels rely on water-based systems. And abrasion is an issue for any gilding, as anyone will know when they're trying to clean gilding. So over the past few decades, an increase in the development and adoption of novel gel technologies in the field of heritage conservation has expanded the landscape of possibilities for approaching cleaning challenges. Gels can be categorized in many different ways, but I think for conservators, the most useful way to think of them is in terms of what we can put in the system. And ultimately, they can be divided up into hydrogel categories or organic solvent gel categories. And over here, on the slide here, I've just got a basic mapping of where we're at with a lot of materials that may be familiar to conservators, and then some that may not be, that I'll be talking about more today. In terms of cleaning gilded surfaces, agar and gel and gum can be useful. Agar is particularly versatile because you can brush apply it on in a warm state and peel remove it. And it's also been looked at as spraying it as well, which increases its ability to conform to complex three-dimensional surfaces and then be peel removed. We haven't had a lot of success in tests that have been done on cleaning gilding for xanthan gum. In my experience, it seems to disrupt the leaf. And Pemulin TR2 emulsions and Carbopol belong to a series of gels that conservators may be more familiar with for solvents, and they're good for loading organic solvents in the system. But the problem is that they are very viscous and very messy brushable systems. So for gilding, it's very difficult to control these on complex three-dimensional objects, removing them and removing the residue from that gel as well. There needs to be more research into lower polarity gel systems to protect water gilded surfaces particularly. And these are gel systems where you've got more flexibility for having a range of different organic solvents in that system to target different kinds of materials that you're trying to remove. So what I've been looking at over the past few years is gels prepared with partially hydrolyzed polyvinyl alcohol. And what this polymer does is it actually produces a gel that is highly viscoelastic, which is fantastic for a number of reasons. It overcomes limitations posed by many other gel systems. It's very physically controllable on the surface. You can apply it, mold it to the surface, and peel it directly from the surface. And these polymers can contain a range of organic solvents, polar organic solvents. You can see here that the way that they behave is they're kind of rigid, but they're also semi-flexible as well. You can see peeling it there. You can weight it to increase its size and create a gel sheet, and they're often very malleable systems as well, so you can cut them to shape. They have self-healing characteristics as well, so you can cut them, join them together, have them reform and create other shapes, and they're extremely useful for molding to surfaces and removing from surfaces. So yeah, this is just playing with the gel. It's a good slide for everyone to see how it behaves. You can, it's also got great tack as well, so it conforms really beautifully and tacks to vertical surfaces very easily. So the sides of frames, outer scotias, it will conform to that. So what is it? Essentially, I'm just going to go back a slide if I can. I'll play this again. So the polymer is partially hydrolyzed polyvinyl acetate, which is a water-soluble semi-crystalline synthetic polymer, which is synthesized from the hydrolysis of polyvinyl acetate. Research into these polymers have been going on since the 1980s, but applications for artwork, conservation of artworks is relatively novel still. And essentially what one needs to know is that depending on how much organic solvents you want to put in the system and the type of solvent you want to put in there, you need to have very specific polymers for this. And in the case of art conservation applications, the most useful polyvinyl alcohol polymers for creating organic solvent gels are those that are 75% or 40% hydrolyzed. Particularly the 40% hydrolyzed, which is what this gel is right here, it can incorporate up to 75% of organic solvent in the system. They're very easy to make. They essentially comprise of 3 components. So you have the polymer, the organic solvents that you dissolve that polymer in, and that are the solvents that you're using to clean the surface. And then you have your cross-linking agent, which in this case is borax, which is dissolved separately, added to that dissolved polymer, stirred vigorously, and then you create a gel. Crucially, the physical performance of these gels is extremely contingent on the ratio of components in the system. So it depends on how much polymer you've got in there, how much cross-linker, and the degree of solvents in that system. That will change the physical properties of these systems. And that's a lot of what my research has focused on that. We had to try to think of a language to describe how these systems work. And so we came up with, you know, how viscoelastic is it? You know, does it fragment? How firm is it? Does it adhere well to the surface? Does it cohere well together, which leads back to whether it fragments or not when you're removing it from the surface. And that language is very useful to describe how these systems behave. So now I'll move on to the case study that I'll be talking about today, in which I'm using a variation of this material. This is a frame for a Corneille de Leon portrait of a man from the National Gallery of Art collection. And it is an example of a tabernacle frame from an early, from an early period. So it's a late 16th century frame. There's a fantastic article that I mentioned earlier on the frame blog that talks about these sorts of frames specifically. There are quite a number of examples of Corneille de Leon frames out there, and they all have very similar, most of them have very similar characteristics in that you have an aedicule, you have with a broken pediment, you have an entablature, you have your columns with your decorative frieze behind there. And then you have a corresponding entablature down the bottom, and then you've got your base, your predella there as well. And it's an example of a frame which is a subset of a Venetian lacquer object, which consists of a mordant gilding scheme. So all of this decoration is mordant gilding, which is where you apply, you trace out the design in an oil medium, you apply the gold leaf and then you remove the excess. So it's very much a gold leaf on top of black ground situation. So when I was looking at this frame, I worked out, which was also mentioned in the frame blog as well, that there are aspects of this frame which are more original than others, shall we say. And the base here, you can see here, is actually a recent addition. So it's likely from the 20th century restoration through here and through here. The columns have been sitting awkwardly with the work and have been faux marbleized. And we worked out through X-ray that they've been cut down and to fit this frame. And you can see that the nail is doweling that together. And yeah, so it's technically a pastiche. These elements through here are extremely worm riddled, very, very hollow, very, very fragile structures. And they appear to be the most original parts of the frame through here, through here, and through here. UV imaging revealed that the varnish scheme is likely to be of a natural resin origin, which I'll elaborate further in the slides. What was very interesting looking at this under the microscope is that we found evidence of a gilding scheme on the mother of pearl inlay in the entablature. And this is very exciting because when I look at examples of Venetian lacquer objects from the article that I mentioned in the frame blog, you see fantastic images of what may have actually been there on that scheme. And they're very elaborate decorative schemes of gilding and polychromy that sit on top of these shell inlay. We carried out mapping XRF, which was a really great discovery to see the gold is very clear there. But what was also very exciting is that we found elements of silver, and that seems to be in a very deliberate scheme alternating with the gold. We also found that the gold and the copper readings that we had overlaid implied that we have a copper gold alloy in that leaf. Sorry, I'm just having trouble moving to the next slide. There we are. So this is another example of mapping XRF, just looking at the right pillar, and it's very exciting to see those silver flowers interspersed with the gold leaves there. This was very useful iron map, which is detecting a lot of the pigments throughout the marbleized finish on the columns, and it's extremely useful for visualizing what's going on underneath this varnish scheme here. So considering that I was looking at cleaning this frame, I obviously want to know what it is that I'm removing. So we actually looked at doing FTIR originally, but the issue with FTIR is it's not exactly very good at delineating between natural resins. It's very spectroscopically similar, so we had all kinds of things occurring in the realms of what could be on an object like this as later additions as well. So we did gas chromatography mass spectrometry, which is more chemically specific for identifying organic materials, polymer materials. And through that, we worked out that colophony is a predominant ingredient in this varnish, which is very consistent for early period Renaissance varnishes from that time. You can also see here just how incredibly unsaturated the surface is, how incredibly degraded it is as well, and very, very hollow. I managed to get a cross section based off how incredibly fragile that area is. There was a tiny little splinter that I managed to dislodge and embed in polyester resin, polish, and view under the microscope. And that's given us good information. We can see the leaf there under bright field. UV green emission green emission is very useful for being able to detect what's going on with this red particle that I can see there. And the fluorescence indication from this suggests that it is a madder red pigment. The black ground doesn't fluoresce. I suspect, based off understanding of this time period, it's very likely to be egg tempera, but I'm waiting on GCMS to clarify this. So testing this type of surface, I had to consider what the surface sensitivity is, and I carried out a couple of tests to work out if it was sensitive to water-based solutions on the one side and then solutions that are less polar on the other side. And I'll just play this here to demonstrate. I actually encountered blanching in most cases. So most of the materials that I would use, most of the solvents that I would use to start off establishing solubility parameters for this type of coating just caused incredible blanching of the surface. And that really reduced my ability to be able to see what I was doing. As you can see, it's an incredibly ornate decorative surface underneath. 2-ethoxyethanol, which some of you may be familiar with as Salisol, sits very well in the XPVAC system when it's cross-linked with alternative cross-linking agent called BDBA. And I wanted to explore these materials, and I found that the 2-ethoxyethanol was the only solvent that didn't blanch the surface and actually managed to disrupt that varnish quite nicely. So I looked at creating a gel with that solvent. And this is the result. So part of what I mentioned earlier about the different types of ratios of the way that you make these gels up really has an influence on how they behave. And so you get very viscous gels, or you can get more rigid gels depending on the components and their interactions in that system. So I had to explore with this material because I had to explore with this solvent. I hadn't put this solvent in this gel system before. And my early test had this kind of result, which was a gel that stayed together It has a good ability to retract on itself. It's very elastic, but as you can see, it's also very loose as well. And I prefer a gel that's a little bit more rigid that you can press into an ornament and remove from an ornament. So bearing that in mind, what I did based off the research I've done into adjusting the components in this system, I looked at increasing the amount of polymer that I use in that gel, and I had a much more pleasing result here, where the gel was much more easy to handle, manipulate, lift and peel from the surface. And then that gel, as you can see here, has worked very, very well as a low impact, soft kind of poulticing gel on the surface here. And I've been able to reveal this oxidized silver border arrangement here. And I'm actually proceeding to clean this frame very slowly at the moment so that we may be able to find out more about the materials and techniques of this object. This is a really beautiful example here of just how well this cleaning is working. I've now got the problem of needing to bring that gilding back once I finish this cleaning, because we have a situation where the gilding is now too bright. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to selectively clean with this, with what's going on with this surface and just how degraded the varnish is. So at the moment, I'm looking around on the frame to see if there is a section that is relatively undisturbed that I can use as a reference where I can leave that. So I'm not removing the entirety of the coating, the original coating of this frame. The surface is, like I mentioned before, extremely hollowed out. So you have it almost moves under the microscope. And so in this particular instance, because the gel is so low impact and you don't have to agitate it on the surface, you're not really applying any surface pressure when that gel is on that surface. So you can clean while it is in this state. But I'm progressing, I'm monitoring that as I go to make sure whether there are some areas I might actually want to consolidate and fill before I actually attempt to clean those areas. You can see here the varnish before cleaning and the varnish during the result of removing that varnish, and just how it restores saturation to that surface. Coming to the columns is extremely difficult, surprisingly difficult, and I've actually had to put my paintings conservation brain on here. We're dealing with a natural resin varnish as well. I'm not sure if it is the same as what is on the frame. I'm currently in the process of trying to work out what that varnish is. But since these columns, have been added to this frame at a later date, it is much more likely to be from the 20th century. And so you're dealing with like a whole different type of scheme there. The gel that I have developed for cleaning the frame so far is actually far too aggressive on this surface. It dissolves the varnish beautifully, and you get a really lovely result with the paint, the marbleized paint finish coming through. However, it is very aggressive on the reds. So I have observed a lot of leaching of red, and so I'm very tentative in these areas and trying to work out a cleaning methodology that is more suitable for these surfaces. I thought about using methanol because it has a slightly a slightly lower swelling capacity than the 2-ethoxyethanol. However, it caused absolutely horrible blanching, too horrible to show here. So I had to address that, go back in with a swabbing method, which was not ideal, and I couldn't control that going forward. So I'm now in the process of trying to work out what kind of gel system would be good to progress these columns and to reveal this material. And I might just point out here that the join line from where the pillar had been cut down shows that a lot of this original marbleizing had been disrupted before I'd removed this coating. So that wasn't caused by the gel, that was caused by the shaving down of that pillar to reconnect it from the past intervention. The iron oxide map here is extremely useful for being able to model what's going on with the morphology of the paint underneath the surface, because otherwise I'm essentially working a bit blind through that layer. So this is kind of, we're now in prospective research range. The gels that the gel that I was looking at for cleaning this frame and I have been using, which is 40% hydrolyzed polyvinyl acetate with benzene 1,4-diboronic acid crosslinker, which is BDBA, is something I'd like to progress further to find out the range of organic solvents that we can actually reasonably get into that system. So that is also progressive research. This research here is looking at more gel systems that are able to tolerate lower polarity solvents, and like a mixture of oxygenated solvents as well. And so you've got here the cyclomethicone systems, which some of you may be familiar with who have worked with water sensitive surfaces. It's essentially a silicone gel that is commercially available as a paste that you can dilute with cyclomethicone D5 solvent. And in that you can emulsify all kinds of different components of aqueous solutions, aspects of organic solvents. And it's fantastic for encasing water-based solvents in a system that is hydrophobic. So you can apply it to something like burnished water gilding scheme, which I'm doing in this picture right here. This is a beautiful 19th century Scotia frame, frame, and I can attack the water soluble dirt through this process without affecting the burnished gilding. The PDMS elastomer is a very new material. I haven't explored this yet, but research has been done into this as a dry cleaning method for soot-coated papers, and it's been characterized recently for art conservation applications. It's essentially a polymer that is, it stands for polydimethyl siloxane, is commercially available. You can cast it yourself. And then it kind of, for those that are familiar with NanoRestore products, they come as gel sheets that you then load in select nanostructure fluids. This is a similar situation where you can cast the gel, cut it to shape, and soak it in whatever solvent you'd like. So unlike the NanoRestore, these elastomers have the capability of actually taking up both polar and non-polar solvents. So you have a wider solvent range to work with. They're not flexible systems. So that's kind of one of a big disadvantage for objects, but I'm going to try and look into whether or not they would be suitable in certain applications for gilding. And I'd just like to also say that this frame has produced quite a lot of interest on a number of platforms, and because of the nature of it's very rare to find frames like from this period that have original surfaces. And so that's why I'm extremely eager to carry out a parallel technical study, which is what I've been doing. And I've been looking around at frames that are very analogous, and the Indianapolis Museum of Art happen to have a frame that they're very interested in exploring themselves that fits in very beautifully to what I'm doing here with this frame. And so we're going to attempt to run a comparative study with that. And I'd just like to acknowledge the army of scientists that have assisted me with this project, and hopefully will going forward. Thank you.
Again, hi, thanks. Again, such a wonderful comprehensive research and treatment. Just amazing to find those original surfaces, like really, really rare and incredible. And those gels, I'm very excited to try them on a reframing project that we have coming up on a gilded frame that's pretty dirty. So great, thank you so much. Coming up next, we have Rosario Granados. Hi, Rosario.
Hello.
Rosario's from the Blanton Museum of Art, and she's here to talk to us about frame making in Venezuela.
So of course, I need to start thanking you, Julia and Adam, and everybody else who is behind the scenes for organizing this conference and for the opportunity to present these early explorations of frame history in colonial Venezuela with all of you. These days, when you hear the name Venezuela, you may immediately think of the chaotic recent elections in which Edmundo González Urrutia was most probably elected president. Less known is the fact that the name of this region appears in the Western imagination as early as 1500. in the map of Juan de la Cosa, made by a pilot turned cartographer who traveled with Amerigo Vespucci on his first trip across the ocean. The toponym was given apparently because the slit houses built by the indigenous local peoples of the surface of Lake Maracaibo made Europeans think of a little Venice, Venezuela in Italian, Venezuela in Spanish. This paper will focus on a series, wrong button. This paper will focus on a series of wooden frames made in Venezuela between 1550 and 1830 that in many cases were kept with the paintings they were made of. Part of a generous donations that Patricia Phelps de Cisneros made to the Blanton in 2016, just months before I joined the museum. The goal in this paper is to discuss the relationship with furniture, where I think it was very nice to hear from the previous presentation by Cynthia Moyer about that, and identify construction and decoration techniques, but I'm not going to go in the technical detail of our previous presentation. But before I do that, however, I would like to start with a very short introduction that provides some historical framework that will allow us to understand much better, the context in which these artifacts were made. Mónica González Torres has recently explored in much detail how important it was for the development of the European settlements in the area the early discoveries of Bank of Pearls in Margarita Island, which you can see on this side of the map. However, on the east side of the territory here, this is Maracaibo Lake, the first city that was established was in 1527, called Santana de Coro, which you can see on the map. Its founders were an Habsburg-based banking family, the Westlers, who received colonial rights to the land from Charles V after they had significantly helped his imperial election as Holy Roman Emperor. Not really interested in establishing themselves in the area, but using that city of Coro mainly as an entry point to what they thought was El Dorado, which was actually an imagined land, as you know, but it was more closer to what is now Colombia. The Germans soon left, leaving behind only a red of roads that could be used by others to later establish, in 1577, the city of Santiago de León de Caracas, also here on the map, which 10 years later would become the province capital, and it continues to be to this day. It was, they chose that land because of its strategy location in the middle of a valley, protected by mountains, but close enough to the port of La Guaira, which meant easy access to Atlantic trade. With a fertile land all across the coast, it's not surprising that a robust trade developed in the area, mainly of cacao, but also in sugarcane. So that's where all your chocolate, European chocolate, came from. The Americas-born Spanish elites running such haciendas where the cacao was produced benefit from the labor of thousands of African slaves, call themselves these elites mantuanos, opposed to the criollos of Mexico and Peru, which I think is very interesting. They lost a lot of power in the early 18th century when the Compañía Guipuzcoana was established to expand tax collection and supervise the slave trade. The territory also at that moment passed from the Viceroyalty of Peru to the newly founded Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada. Despite trying to rebel against the restrictions in between 1749 and 1751, the elites were able to maintain their wealth by encouraging marriage between cousins, and a strategy that, according to historian Robert J. Ferry, was led by the women in the family, which I think is also very interesting. Along with the many slaves that were forced to work in the cacao plantations and were key to their success, there were a significant numbers of immigrants from the Canary Islands that traveled to Venezuela. This territory was claimed by the Crown of Castile in the late 15th century. And allegedly served as a laboratory for many of the conquest strategies that later on were imposed in the Americas, mainly related to indigenous conversion and assimilation. By the 1700s, isleños, or islanders, as they were known to be distinguished from the peninsulares, or Spaniards born in the peninsula, traveled to Venezuela seeking opportunities to own land by establishing their own haciendas or, in rare cases, marrying to elite families. Some others came as artists and craftsmen, and that's the case of Domingo Gutiérrez, a master carpenter active in Caracas in 1732, known for making altarpieces for various churches, building ephemeral buildings used in public ceremonies, and acting as appraiser in various wills, dowries, and inventories. He was also a renowned cabinet and frame maker, and it's interesting to see the stylistic similarities between his altarpieces and the smaller pieces of furniture that have been preserved and linked to his name through textual documentation. You can see that specifically on the ornamentation features of the table and the sides of this tabernacle that is part of the Denver Art Museum. He was indeed the one who defined the taste for all things Rococo in the area, characterized by exuberant use of curving natural forms. The frame that you are seeing on screen right now has been attributed to his hand, as it follows indeed the same sinuous pattern full of foliate and floral ornamentation. The wood chosen for this frame is cedar, as much of the objects I will be discussing in the minutes that I have with you. He made his frame for this painting for a painter named Juan Pedro Lopez, who was the most famous painter of the time and whose artistic skill is evident in this portrait of the very popular statue of Our Lady of Guidance, Nuestra Señora de Guía. I don't know if everybody's being able to see the caption there. Venerated at the Church of San Mauricio in Caracas, patroness of a Black confraternity founded since 1701. Legend has it that the wooden statue was found in a box floating in the sea, and the response to the prayers of Captain Juan Delgado that took him back to Venezuela safely. And I think you can see the similarities between that tabernacle and the frame that you're evident here. Lopez, the son of also two Canary Island immigrants, but already born in Venezuela, was a very prolific artist as well. Art historian and photographer Alfredo Boulton, who was the subject of a very interesting recent exhibition at the Getty, attributed 147 pieces to his hand, only or mainly by stylistic comparison. For his part, historian Carlos Duarte, who was until recently the director of the Museo Colonial in Caracas, attributed also 7 sculptures and 7 gilded works, in which he used the water gilding technique described so wonderfully this morning by Marie Dubost in a previous session. In 1765, it is documented that Lopez took gilding jobs for altarpieces that were carved by Gutiérrez, the Canary artist that I just mentioned, from who he might have also acquired cabinet maker skills. And this is something that I would like you to remember. It is worth noting that from the 290 artists listed in Carlos Duarte's bibliographic dictionary of artists active in Venezuela during the colonial period, Lopez stands as one of the only 8 people who were skilled in such 3 activities: painting, gilding, and sculpture. This reduced number is significant because 72 of those artists are listed only as painters of different skill and status, while 50 others appeared listed as knowing painting and gilding, and other 7 are listed as painters and sculptors. So Lopez was very able to change from one activity to the other. And we don't know exactly to what extent he was involved in frame making. Lopez's work had numerous followers who copied his images with varying degrees of success. And it's known that he had a prolific workshop, and apparently this painting was made by that group of people working with him. His pictorial style popularized, idealized, and serene figures like the one we see on the screen now, with sweet facial expressions and delicate and harmonious color contrasts, very much influenced by painters active in colonial Mexico, like Miguel Cabrera. And this is very interesting as well, because there was a lot of trade between Mexico and Venezuela through the Caribbean, and not only of cacao and sugar, but also a lot of painting. And it has been studied extensively, the presence of Mexican painting in Caracas as well. The frame in this case follows a very clear shape with only chisel details at the corners, to which very thin layers of wood have been attached. And this is a detail that we're going to focus a bit more in later cases. These 2 paintings I now share with you have been also attributed to Juan Pedro Lopez, and take this singularly thin frame to the next level, following a stronger serpentine layout on the one on the right, but which adds rich shell-like decoration achieved by adding plaster lines before the gilding process took place. The frame of this composition, the one on the right that is now there, paired with the back and with the detail of the back, and that it's 100% aimed to provoke an emotional reaction from the viewer to the Passion of Christ, was made by using a dovetail half-lap joint, as you can see on the detail. This is a significant choice because the panel, as I mentioned, is rather thin, only an inch wide, which implies a rather high skill in using manufacturing the frame. Significant is also that thin wood reinforcement. I have been asking what's the best way to describe this section here. That is attached to the top back of the frame. And it's significant because this element does not serve any decorative purpose, and it's certainly not necessary to support the canvas. It is there only to add strength to that top section that was added to the frame. The picture that I'm sharing with you now shows how we are addressing this making process of frames in the Art of the Spanish Americas galleries at the Blanton Museum of Art that currently focus on wood making in Venezuela and Brazil. We decided to show the back of the painting so we could explain on the label that I'm sharing with you, the lower part, how the painting, or better said, the frame that because we're seeing its back. And I decided to hang the painting like that, following a very inspiring recent show at Museo del Prado on back of paintings. So my logic when placing the frame like this was to have a conversation with a triptych next to it. The object in question has been attributed also to Lopez because of the quality of the paintings on the wings. And the goal was to see how the 2 pieces follow the same winding silhouette, and also the little painting that it's inside the triptych. But I wanted to show you also that the back of the piece of the triptych has the same strange element here that is obviously not necessary, but is there to add to this element that again is extremely thin, even thinner than the frame, only half an inch, and has these many constructive and stylistic similarities with the frame. That is increased, or that relationship is increased when the triptych is closed, which we do. We took pictures when we were installing it. And I hope you can see that the shape is exactly the same when we add into the equation the a cup board that has been also attributed to Juan Pedro Lopez because of the flowers that were added there, because of the style. Inventories of the second half of the second half of the 18th century consistently describe frames and furniture, especially those of headboards, like the one that I'm showing you here, but also chairs or even dressing tables as having copetes or crests, an element that we have seen repeatedly in early presentations, because of the style that was shared across the globe. The frames of paintings and mirrors, in all cases, describing in these materials and this text, these inventories, are described as marcos dorados con copete, which is, of course, the reason why this presentation is called the Golden Crest. And here I wanted to emphasize this conversation about the thickness of these panels, because it's exactly the same 1 inch in the cupboard that it is on the frame. The triptych around the main cavity is slightly thinner, but I think there is a point in case to connect this making of frames with the furniture. But I look forward to your feedback to see if this really stands and if that was something that was common around in other areas. And I wanted to emphasize how different they look because we have a little frame made or attributed to Domingo Gutierrez that even if it's much smaller, it's thicker because it has these 2 layers of frames together. But I don't know. I think it's worth seeing them together and decide how much the contrast can be made. I'm showing you now that painting that is you saw in the center of the triptych, and you can see how it's also using the same technique with a dovetail half-lap joint that was used in the other frame, in the Christ frame, and it's also 1 inch wide in the thickness of the frame. What I think is very interesting is that we have in the museum a third painting that follows the same or a similar pattern, but is made from one single piece of wood, cedar wood. It looks closer in that sense to the cupboard crest because you don't have any joints. According to the sticker on the back that you can see on the bottom, that was placed by the Friends of Colonial Art Association, who helped run the Museo Colonial Quinta de Nauco in Caracas, the frame is made of cedar, as I mentioned before. And it's very interesting, and we're very fortunate because Dr. Alejandra Quintanar, a biologist, a Mexican biologist expert in wood identification in furniture and even musical instruments, is coming to the Blanton in the coming months to help us confirm the material of these and other pieces that I have shared with you. So the purpose is that after compiling this very basic historical background, we are going to be able to add to the conversation of how these objects were made by identifying the wood. And so the golden crest of these three frames were decorated, as you maybe have noticed, in different techniques. The Christ and the other painting that I show you were decorated using plaster. There was added to the frame before the frame was gilded, just as much as this little painting that was carved and then gilded. A third technique, which was used in the Santa Margarita painting, is different because it used the desgrafito or esgrafiado in Spanish. And it's characterized by these delicate lines traced directly with a gouge or another instrument to the already gilded wood frame. Different to the estofado technique used in polychrome sculpture aimed to mimic rich fabrics. However, the lines in this frame technique were not too deep, as their purpose was not to expose the color underneath. It was only to add some decoration on the surface to enhance the visual presence of the frame. Based on the many paintings linked to Lopez that show these characteristic thin and very surprisingly thin frames and voluted, decorated with these curves, it would be tempting to assume that he was designing or carving them himself directly, but I have not found any documents that confirm that he actually had a fourth skill under his wing. And it's important because there is documentation that link specific carvers with specific frames, like this one, that is attributed to Antonio José Cardoso, an Afro-descendant cabinet and altar peacemaker who died in 1808. His work, as different as they are from those linked to Lopez, could certainly be described as having copetes or these crests. But I argue that they're completely different and they are more, they're following global tendencies instead of adapting to local context as the ones that I presented to you before. The same thing can be said of these other two frames that we are seeing now on the screen. But the thing that I like about in relationship with the cabinet making is that they are really like puzzles. Maybe not in this image, but to the naked eye, it's possible to see the connection between the different planks. And if you consider how headboards were made, where also planks of wood were just attached to each other and consolidated. And part of the problem we have with this pair of frames is that they were heavily intervened. In fact, the paintings were attached not to other linen, but to plexiglass, which is a technique that I have never seen before. And unfortunately, there's no record of who made this decision to be so aggressive with the paintings. And so it's hard to know how much the conservation made at some point really alter the original design of the frames and how much they affected the original construction of the frames. But let me move to briefly talk about other types of frame adorned with gold paint, just to show a significant contrast with those we have seen thus far. This object that you're seeing on the left was made in the city of Mérida, south of Maracaibo Lake, for the poor clerics nuns of the city. Hence the iconography that mingles the Virgin Mary with the founder of the order, if it's not Clare of Montefalco. The making of this frame is rather interesting because of the contrast, again, that it allows to make with the frames that I discussed before. I love that is using recycle pages of a book, most likely a micelle, but I have yet to identify which book it is because it's so broken up that it's very difficult to find the exact sentence where it would allow me to see what is the book that was used. But I love the fact that they were interested enough in covering the joints. And what you can see is that many different joints were used. We still have the butt joint on the second part of the frame, but on the front. But you have the dovetail half lap on the bottom, on the internal side of the frame. And I think it's interesting because then you can tell that there was an interest in adding more stability, and that people around the same time were trained in making these very thin, or thicker frames. And so the decision of making the very thin frames that we saw before, it was a very conscious decision. More than only construction itself, what motivates me to share these frames is the technique that was used in decoration, contrasting with the different pieces that we saw. Because while the Pour Claire's non's frame on the left has a leaf-like designs, these are more really saturated, and thus they're almost volumetric, which is absolutely an 18th century preference. The brownish frame on the right displays a two-dimensional linear decoration of vegetables, vegetation, that includes these conic elements, probably bells, and it is more characteristic of the second decade of the 1800s. This second frame was made using stencils, a technique that was popularized in Venezuela by Joseph P. Whiting, a cabinet maker from Baltimore who was part of a wave of craftsmen from the United States, Germany, and even the Netherlands, who traveled to South America seeking to capitalize on the new markets that opened after independence from Spain had been declared in 1811. The movement that had chaotically started as a response to the French invasion of the Iberian Peninsula took decades to consolidate, as Simón Bolívar and other American-born Spaniards did not agree in which faction should lead the new republic. The political turmoil brought a substantial change in taste that those foreigners were eager to satisfy. And it's very important to understand also because there was a moment in which Bolívar expelled all the Spaniards and Canary people from the Canary Islands. And that's why Americans and Germans and Dutch craft makers were able to establish themselves in Caracas and in the rest of the area. Whiting established a store and a cabinet-making workshop in Caracas, advertising his production of furniture in newspapers, which I think is very interesting, claiming a unique combination of local woods like mahogany, but crafted in the most modern of styles. And we have the documentation of the words that he chose to promote his work. He most likely, and I think this is very interesting, had learned to use stencils through the work of the Irish brothers, John and Hugh Finlay, who were very prolific in the Maryland city, as it often the case. As it is often the case, local craftsmen grew wary of foreigners and fought for an increased tax on importations. And after battling competition with these other foreign cabinet makers also established in Caracas, Whiting decided to leave for Panama, where he died. And I think it's interesting because although there were all these many different cabinet makers from Germany and the Netherlands, Vining was the only one who was using the stencil technique. And as you could see, he was a trained cabinet maker and was also making frames. I want to finish. My cat is really trying to get into the room, and maybe that's why you're listening to something bumping, but that's my cat that is not invited to the conversation about frames. But I want to finish with this slide just to say that the universe of frame making in late 18th century Venezuela is vast and impossible to summarize in a 20-minute presentation like this one. But I wanted to leave you with some other copetes or other frames with copetes of Crests from the Toma Foundation collection, from the Museo Quinta de Arauco in Caracas, and from the Blanton, to show you the diversity of frame making that it was happening at the time. There were, like the one you have on the right, there are mirrors decorated with, frames decorated with mirrors. That was something very popular in Peru. And were carved with full figures, as the image of also Our Lady of Light you have there. And there were others that were made in marqueterie. And that was also very unique from Caracas at the end of the 18th century, but that unfortunately are not preserved. All of them, all these very diverse objects, and the ones that I briefly discussed with you, represent a corpus worth of further study, and that's where I am right now. And this is just a preliminary result of those findings, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to share them with you and to learn what is your opinion of these objects, and what are the techniques and modes of craftsmanship that you identify based on your expertise. Thank you so much.
So much, Rosario. I spent the past couple of years looking through our over 1,000 frames in our collection, and so many of them are French and English frames from the 18th, 17th, and 18th century, and it's just very nice for my eyes to see something different. So
That is different.
Yeah. And it's so great to see the backs and the construction, the joinery, and to see that displayed in the gallery just really is great. Thank you so much. And the relationship to furniture and everything. Yeah, thank you very much. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to Philippe Avila. Hi, Philippe.
Hello.
Hi. Philippe is an independent objects conservator from New York City, and I'll put his bio in the chat as well. Take it away.
Hello. So thank you very much. And today I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to try to give you a very broad overview of what was happening in the Hispanic world during the colonial period, and show you how the different tradition and cultures influence each other for a period of over 300 years. So let's start. During the 15th century, Portugal and Spain. Oh, sorry, I forgot to share my screen. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. So during the 15th century, Portugal and Spain undertook commercial, religious, and scientific expansion by opening new trade routes from Europe to Asia. After conquering Africa, Portuguese entered the Indian Ocean and reached India. And in 1543, they disembarked on the coast of Japan. It was the first time that Europeans set foot in the Japanese islands, culminating their commercial and religious expansion to the Far East. 6 years later, Francis Xavier, the founder of the Jesuit order, followed. And from this moment, the Jesuit order began to spread the Catholic faith in Japan and initiated their scientific work. Soon enough, traders and missionaries encountered the need to obtain furnishing for their own use and also for export. In the academies that the Jesuits founded in Japan, Japanese craftsmen initiated the production of those furniture objects. And during that process, Europeans became acquainted with lacquer, with Asian lacquer called urushi. This decorative finish originate from the sap of a local tree called Rus versiflua that is very close to the poison ivy, and it is toxic and travel very, very badly. It turns bad like milk. That finish was absolutely unknown to Europeans, and they were absolutely marveled to their physical quality, the shine, the smoothness, and more than anything, its durability. Japanese lacquer could withstand all sorts of liquids, hot or cold, without suffering any damage. And that was something that never existed in Europe before. I have to, I mean, this was like the invention of the Tupperware in the 1950s. You have to know, to see and understand that before that time, the only way you could finish a frame or a piece of furniture was either waxing it or gilding it. So I want to show you a picture of one of those objects that were done in Japan at the time. And those objects were, you know, they recreated European shapes, like an object like this casket or lecterns or tables or even oratories and frames. And here, for example, well, all these frames and objects bear the name of Namban. And Namban means barbarian of the South, which is a name that Japanese people gave to Europeans when they arrived. So Namban objects and Namban art characterized by the use of Japanese lacquer and the use of mother of pearl inlay. The paintings were done in Europe, mostly in Italy and Flanders, but also in Spain. And those paintings were brought to Japan just to make sure that the Catholic orthodoxy was well followed. On the frames that we see here, we can see different techniques of lacquer, like the makie, which is the black background, the iramakie, that is the gold painted figures, and raden, which is the mother of pearl inlay technique. Also, the kind of motif that we find are mostly geometrical, like the denticles that we find on the outer edge, and also foliage motif, like leaves of ginkgo tree that you can see on the sides, or maple, Japanese maple tree. And on this particular object, there is like the anagram of the Jesuit order on the top center of the pediment. Oops. These type of frames were performed during like a very sensitive time during the evangelization of Japan. And Jesuits or Franciscan, which is another order that followed afterwards, needed to have frames that would be easily movable. So that's why we find these frames with two folding doors that could be handled easily. And on the previous one, we don't see any mother of pearl inlay, but on this one, yes, we can see it. And we can also see that the frame on the central element is a cassetta frame, very typical of the 16th century period. We also see other frames that have some geometric motif like these ones, and less elaborated mother of pearl inlays on the frieze. But what I want to show you is this particular example that has a folding panel that would protect the painting and else during travel, and when showing your Catholic religion would not be safe to do. This is like another frame, this one without doors. I believe it was done not as a triptych or an oratory, but as a frame. For those interested to find out more about this painting, they can check the frame blog where I publish an article about it. And while after that, I found what I believe is provenance for this painting. I discovered a very similar altarpiece in one of the Azores Islands that were part of the Crown of Portugal, in a Jesuit monastery. No, I'm sorry, a Jesuit college. There is an altarpiece with a very similar composition, and that altarpiece was done by a Portuguese painter active in Sevilla. His name was Vasco Pereira Lusitano, and if you Google that name, you'll be able to see the altarpiece that might have done by the same painter or one of his followers during its trip to Japan, because the Azores were the last European outspot before entering the trip to Asia, conquering Africa. Here there is a detail of the very same frame that we can see the mother of pearl inlay and the little rosettes that are painted with a lot of detail. Here, I want to show you this oratory. Here with the closed doors and here with open doors. And as you can see, this one is made entirely of mother of pearl plaques that have been nailed to a wooden structure. And the reason why I want to show you that is because Japanese scholars have suggested that mother of pearl may have been brought by foreigners, because during that time, lacquerware in Japan, lacquerware devoted to the local population, was not usually ornated with mother of pearl. It was a very rare technique in Japan at that time. And what has been suggested is that the Europeans brought the technique to Japan and asked the manufacturer, who were Japanese converts, to include mother of pearl in their designs and their frames and furniture, because few decades before, the Portuguese colonized Goa on the west coast of India. And before that, Goa, which was already like a commercial hub in India, was trading with the Sultanate of Gujarat. And the Sultanate of Gujarat during that period was specialized in the manufacturing of precious objects entirely made of mother of pearl. So when we see the similarities in the structure and the shape of this Indian frame from the 17th century, one can believe that this hypothesis is very much true. On the other side, the Spanish Empire also at the end of the 16th century, Spain also started to search for an alternative route to the Far East. But instead of sailing south and east, they decided to sail west. They did not expect to find the American continent on their way, but it did not stop them. In 1521, they found a way to travel through Mexico and reach the Far East, more specifically the Philippines, where they set up their own commercial hub. So the production of Namban objects ceased during around 1615 because Europeans were expelled from Japan. They did not reopen to the West until the 19th century. But so the exports of Namban to New Spain, Mexico, ended at that time, but the influence that they showed to viceregal art, let's say Mexican art, was profound and lasted for a very long time. Another thing is that when Spaniards encountered America, they found that pre-Hispanic cultures already had techniques that were similar to lacquer. And by that, I mean that American lacquers were as resistant and not as shiny and bright as the Asian ones, but pretty much. So I wanted to show you this large chest that is decorated on the front panel with decoration that reminds very much what we have seen on that Japanese frame here. At the exception that the chest was decorated with a Mexican lacquer technique. And this technique called maque was obtained from the oil of a local tree called kia that was mixed with, it's a little nasty to describe it, but the juices of bugs that were squeezed and melted on top of a fire. And this was filtered and mixed with the kia oil and pigments as well, and could be applied by brush. Like in this case, this chest was done with brush Mexican lacquer that is characteristic of the city of Pátzcuaro in the province of Guerrero, well, the state of Guerrero. Here, there is a frame, a caseta frame that was decorated with black paint. We believe that is oil paint that was glazed with what I believe is Kia oil, and also inlaid with mother of pearl. It's not like a very, very good frame, but you can see here when I have the arrow, all the mother of pearl inlaid has been inlaid to create those grapes. Here, there is like a fantastic piece. This is like a coat of arms of the Inquisition. It's and this piece has a very interesting feature, is that it has an integral frame. So the border that raised about 1 inch over the surface of the painting is an integral part of the painting. And it was decorated, let me show you the detail here. It was decorated as well with mother of pearl and little motifs that we can find on Japanese number pieces. And so the technique used here is a combination of mother of pearl inlay that has been glazed to give additional shine, and also tempera that we can see on the red background, and also oil that we can see on the little motifs on the black painted triangles of the outrage. And on the image to the right, we see how the craftsman arranged the mother of pearl plaque in a very pre-Hispanic fashion. When we can also see that on the plaques of the coat of arms, on the shields of the Inquisition here. But what this suggests is that indigenous people were involved in the manufacturing of those works of art, not just European immigrants. I wanted to tell you as well that the mother of pearl technique and inlay was not foreign to pre-Hispanic cultures. They did use them in their own objects during pre-Hispanic period. I wanted to show you this ceremonial shield that was decorated with turquoise, coral, and also mother of pearl. And the arrangement of the plaques is very, very similar to what we see here. On this frame that doesn't come from the Viceroyalty of New Spain, that is today Mexico, but comes from the Viceroyalty of Peru. I am showing you this example because to illustrate that the use of glazed shell work was not limited to seawater shells, but also sweet water shells. And on this one is a mosaic of very, very, very small snails that are about 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters wide in diameter, and that were arranged to imitate some scaling. Here there is a picture of the shell itself. And here there is a picture of what we know as enconchados. Enconchados translate as shelled. And we could find during the 17th and the 18th century plenty of work done with shell work. Paintings, but also frames, and both of them were the the denomination of enconchado. And as you can see, the frame here has a very, very striking oriental feeling for the use not just of glazed mother of pearl, but also all those foliate motifs that recall the Nambenja objects that we have seen before. And this picture shows how contemporaries would have seen those paintings at the time. The varnishes that were used to cover them have yellowed over time, and in some areas like Spain, they decided to keep the original varnish on top, even if it has yellowed over time. Here there's a caseta frame with extended corners, and yes, with extended corners that is characteristic of the reign of Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king. And again, we see these foliage and flowers and birds that have this very strong Japanese feeling. Here, there is another enconchado frame and painting that you can see at the Metropolitan Museum, which has been exposed after the remodeling of the painting galleries. And you can see the outer edge and the inner edge that are decorated with these alternating triangles of mother of pearl inlay and black painted background, as well as a more refined version of grapes inlaid with mother of pearl, European motifs on the corners, and also an added three-dimensionality given to the tendrils of those foliage. Here, there is perhaps like the most beautiful frame I have ever seen. It's on a oversized painting. This is like almost 6 feet tall. And the painting has a mixed technique. The background, the white background, and the faces of the angel and the Virgin are made of burnished tempera. There is oil gilding on the rays around the Virgin, but there is also a very, very sophisticated way to dispose the mother of pearl plaques and coat them and glaze them to give three-dimensionality and a very, very rich finish. And those mother of pearl plaques are present on the robe of the Virgin, but also the clothing of the angel and the frame. I wanted to say also that the frame is integral to the painting. It has been designed and manufactured on the same plane of the painting. You know, the outer edge is it's almost identical of the painting of the coat of arms of the Inquisition I showed earlier. And here on these pictures, there is a close-up on how these mother of pearl plaques have been assembled and painted over. And I wanted to bring your attention to the flower here between the two birds, where you can see some wider areas, like here, for example, or here where the arrow is. And that's where the glazed has chipped and falling off. but you can see how the craftsmen used different kinds of shells, not just mother of pearl, but also abalone, took advantage of their shade and increased these shades to bring the color further. That is something I have never seen before. I do suspect that they use Kia oil to glaze those mother of pearl plaques. Another technique and another location where Mexican lacquer was done is Periban and Uruapan. This lacquer was not applied with brush whatsoever. Instead, the wooden structure would have been carved, and then each color would have been embossed separately into the wood. What I wanted to show you with these, I could not find a frame done with Periban or Uruapan lacquer, but I'm showing you these batea, a very large presentation dish that was used to wash fruit or even babies. I mean, this is like almost 3 feet in diameters. And for the ones in the Metropolitan, in New York, they can go and take a look because it's exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum. So I wanted to bring your attention as well that the Mexican lacquer was considered as superior in a way to the Asian lacquer because you could use all sorts of color. And the Japanese lacquer had a very, very limited palette, either black or some iron oxides ranging from yellow ochre to dark sienna. And also they would use metal and shell inlaid, but no yellows, no greens, no blues. So these type of objects were manufactured in New Spain, Mexico, and those were also exported to Spain, and they appear described as in inventories and wills as charoles indianos, or just charoles. It is very difficult to find an exact translation to this word, but when you Google it, the only thing that comes out is patent leather. That refer to the sheen, but not exactly to this technique. And on this picture, I'm sorry, I don't have a frame to show you either, even if I saw them many years ago at the Museum of America in Madrid. This is a Mexican casket that is decorated with Mexican lacquer. From Olinala, and in the state of Guerrero. And these areas specialize or characterized by the use of red backgrounds, where they embossed and also scratch those designs into the wood. And I was interested to show you that because the designs are influenced by textile designs that came from India and that were part of all those precious goods that were transported from the Far East to first Mexico and Spain. I forgot to tell you something very important, is that the trip to Asia from Spain had a kind of a stop in between. So when ships would leave Manila, they would sail east and they would arrive to the coast of Acapulco on the Pacific coast of Mexico. From there, the boats would be unloaded and their contact would have been transported through land to Veracruz on the Atlantic coast of Mexico. During the land trip, many of those objects were displayed and sold in Mexico City fairs, and that way they became very, very influential. Among all those objects were textiles that reach a wide portion of the population. You know, like from cotton to silks, almost everybody had something from India. And those textiles actually were done and are called palampore textiles. And that's where all these influence comes from. With that, I want to, sorry, I want to show you that Asian influence in New Spain did not come only from Japan, but also from India. And here I am showing you a completely different technique that is also lacquer, very, very resistant to all sorts of damages. And this one was done in the 17th century with the technique called barniz de pasto, varnish of pasto, from the Colombian city of Pasto. This technique is not exclusive of Colombia. It was done in the Viceroy, in the New Kingdom of Granada, that encompass Ecuador and Colombia. And the technique is completely different. The material came from the bud of a tree that is found in the Amazon forest. And that tree is called mopa mopa. So at a certain time of the year, the Indians would go into the forest to collect those buds. They would put them into water to melt them down and create kind of like a bowl of chewing gum. They would masticate to clean off of impurities. And after that, they would either stain it with colorants or pigments. If they would choose colorants, the barniz de pasto would become transparent. And if they use pigments, the barniz de pasto would become opaque. Once this was done, they would eat up those balls again and stretch them with their hands and lips, just until they would obtain like very, very, very thin, like cigarette paper thin membranes that, while they were still hot, would be attached to a silver leaf that has been previously attached to the structure of the frame. And with that, they could obtain, here I'm showing you like a detailed picture of the surface, they could obtain those metallic effects that we still can see on these frames, but in a hard way somehow, because of all the cracks that have opened up and darkened the silver leaf. But they could superpose those layers of barniz to obtain more refined colors and even to obtain like iridescent iridescent colors, very much like the ones we would find like on the feathers of exotic birds. And one has to note that this technique that was also pre-Hispanic, especially valued the color of the birds of paradise, and among the indigenous population, feathers were considered as a very, very valuable commodity. And meanwhile, in Europe, other things happened because Europeans realized how superb lacquer technique was, how resistant lacquer was. There was a course, there was a race to find a formula that could replicate or get very close to the qualities of Asian lacquer or American lacquers. And the first treaty to publish like a series of recipes was published in London in 1688. So what characterized these treaties is that most of the formulas that were given and recipes are based on the use of shellac, which is a byproduct of the dye industry. You would obtain shellac from the secretion of the bugs that are used to make stains, and those bugs are cochineal as well. And but the good thing about the best thing, about this book is that for the first time it introduces designs of chinoiserie that could be reproduced by craftsmen when they wanted to replicate these techniques. This was especially influential to the manufacturing of Dutch and British Japanese during the 17th and the 18th century. On the other side, Jesuits, Italian Jesuits, continue their work into research. And in 1720, Filippo Bonanni published in Rome what is probably the most influential and the best written treatise on lacquer. It's not just like a compendium of recipes, but also a book on the history of lacquer, and it brings back a lot of recipes, not just for Japanese lacquer, but Japanese, Chinese, Turkish varnishes that were very important, because I mean, one must not forget, but when lacquer was discovered, other things were happening in the world. Italian artists were debating about the primacy of the arts, and among what they. So yes, so the Italian, the most important feature on this book is that Italians, Jesuits, found a way to mix resins that were soluble in turpentine and some others that were soluble in alcohol. And with that, they were able to create varnishes that were much more resistant and could be used on furniture and frames without suffering damage. There is an example of what could be done with the recipes published by the Jesuits. And here I wanted to show you the cover page of the Spanish edition that was published in Valencia in 1755. And that book was translated to a lot of different languages in Europe by other Jesuits as well. And here I wanted to show you as a last picture, not a very good frame, but a frame that was done in Spain and that is quite popular, but was obtained with these recipes as well. And it has green lacquer and some gilded foliage on the centers and corners. So thank you very much for this long presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Philippe. That's fascinating talk about transfer and exchange of materials and techniques along with people and ideas. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you tomorrow morning. Have a great evening or afternoon or morning, wherever you are.